Hello and welcome to Not to Get Political, the podcast where we delve into the world of politics and hope to remain unscathed. Today I'm joined by Mic Wright, a journalist. Mick, how are we?
All right.
Thank
you very much.
You're down in London today to cover the bye-elections. Well, there's 3 bye-elections going on, but you're here to cover the Uxbridge one.
Yeah, I'm doing Uxbridge because the most mad people are at the Uxbridge by-election, essentially. That's the reason. A lot of candidates. Obviously, Boris Johnson's former constituency, so there's a lot going on there. You've got Lawrence Fox, you've got Count Bimface, you've got...
All the regulars.
Count Bimface, a respectable candidate.
Let's. Do you want to make? Should we make a prediction in the recording? How do you think it's going to go?
It's a mugs game. Well, it's hard to say. Labour could take it, but they might not. I think ULEZ is a huge thing. Like, literally, because the likelihood is this is going to come out after it's happened, right? And how I feel right now is I think it will be a slight Tory hold. Like, majority drops, but probably a hold because. People in that area, I did go there for a kind of recon recently, and they really hate ULEZ. They hate it. So
what's the objection to ULEZ? For those of you who are listening who aren't aware, ULEZ is ultra low emission zone. It was brought in by Boris Johnson, quite ironically,
and then
adopted by Sadiq Khan.
Increased by under Sadiq.
Been known like his flagship policy.
The objections are a lot of times quite. I don't want to be horrible to people. Not ignorant, but like really pushed by, say, the Evening Standard and the Daily Mail and all those kind of papers. Essentially, it's the feeling that small businesses will struggle because you got to drive your van and then it charges you every day and stuff. I think there are aspects of ULEZ that aren't great, actually, like in terms of the application of it, but the principle in general is good, right? Let's reduce the number of cars and stuff. I think they could do a better thing with small businesses that have vans. I think they could have some exceptions and stuff like that. Exemptions, maybe. I think Sadiq Khan, as a mayor, is... he'll win again, and I don't mind him. And I don't live in London anymore, but I used to. And I lived through the Livingston mayoralty, the Boris mayoralty, and a part of the Sadiq Khan mayoralty. And I think he's an okay mayor. I think the mayor has some problems because ultimately the mayor is very restricted in what they can do. The problem for the mayor is that national government can really hamstring you because, for instance, like the mayor is responsible for TfL, but the national government could do things where TfL nearly goes bankrupt and then you have to desperately say to national government, can you not let TfL go bankrupt? Or, you have some control over the way that, say, private hire cars work, but not totally. And that's the problem that you're always dealing with is that national government can... It was quite good for Boris Johnson because he was a Tory mayor with a Tory government. If you're a Labour mayor with a Tory government or vice versa, I think it's always going to be difficult.
And I guess with Sadiq Khan, there's often been a big focus on crime in London and this sort of big phenomenon regarding it. And it's often felt like when there's a heinous crime in London, Sadiq Khan is somehow blamed for it, like he's Batman and he can prevent crime that's going on.
But it's highly racialised, right? Because you had Trump going on about Sadiq Khan, and you're like, why is Trump even bothered about this? It's because Sadiq Khan is a Muslim mayor. But, London is a very diverse city with many, many Muslim residents, and it's perfectly acceptable, in fact, desirable, that you would have a mayor that represents the city as it is. Also, the thing about Sadiq Khan is I find him, he's a centrist, and I think he could be much more radical on some things. But, he is the son of a bus driver. There's a certain element when you look at Sadiq Khan, you go, well, it's kind of cool that the guy has gone from, a family, a working class family, to being the mayor of London. You have to look at that and go, that's quite good. That's a system working quite well. I think he's going to have problems if Keir Starmer does become Prime Minister, because I think even though Khan is quite centrist, he's more radical than... It's not hard to be more radical than Starmer, but he is, and I think he'll have problems. I think he'll have problems because Starmer will try and, put the boot on his throat.
So the reason I kind of brought you on today, other than talk about the by-elections, is obviously the events that have been going on this week. So this week, there's been the focus on the Conservatives cracking down on Mickey Mouse degrees and Labour's refusal, or Keir Starmer's refusal, to scrap the 2-child cap on benefits. So we'll start with Mickey Mouse degrees. Do you think that there are useless degrees?
No. I don't think there's any such thing as that, because fundamentally, for instance, one of the best degrees to do in terms of economic outcomes is classics, right? And that's dead languages, right? But people who do it are generally quite posh, and they end up in investment banking. And they're not investment banking because investment banking needs classics. It's to do with feeling you have connections. And in another way of looking at it, a lot of degrees are just about thinking. Like you do a history degree, and then you go and do any kind of different job, but they just go, oh, you can learn things. Most jobs, you learn what the job requires when you're doing the job. Like first person in my family to go to any university. I did an education degree. It's like mostly philosophy, psychology, history, and sociology of education, right? And I'm a journalist. And I'm a journalist because I did loads of journalism at university. And so when I came out of university, people were like, oh, you spent 3 years writing on university newspapers and you've got a good degree, so you obviously have a brain.
Yeah.
But the degree is sort of irrelevant. And at this point, 20 years in, I mean, I've been writing for money since I was 19 and I'm 39 now. When I get jobs, no one cares about my degree. They just go, oh, you have been a journalist for 20 years.
Yeah.
So at a certain point, I say to my stepdaughter a lot, it's like GCSEs are the key to doing A-levels. A-levels are the key to doing a degree, and a degree is a key to saying, I have a certain kind of mindset, give me a job.
Yeah.
Unless it's a professional qualification like being a doctor or an architect or something like that. But generally degrees, your degree and your job are pretty disconnected other than you have a degree.
So I guess when sort of reading this and sort of reading in between the lines, when I've looked at sort of voter intention, the way that voters might be voting at the next election, how the electorate's going to vote, one of the things I've noticed is that amongst degree holders and young people, they're less likely to vote Tory. Yeah. Do you think that there is an element of the Conservative Party trying to change the electorate and sort of mould it into their favour?
It's not even an element, it's 100% that's the case. And that's what's so bad about the general coverage of this story is to... when you do media training, right, one of the things that I've media trained executives at various companies, right? When I've been skint and I've been asked, will you do media training? And one of the key things in media training is you say, you don't have to accept the premise. Like if you're talking to someone like you and you ask a question and I don't want to answer that question, I can say, I don't think that's the issue. I think this is the issue. And the trouble with the media is it always accepts the premise that the Tories create. So the premise is there are Mickey Mouse degrees. Now, a good media, an effective media would go, was this even true? And the answer is no, because they've, since the Blair era, but even back to the Thatcherite era, universities have been made into a marketplace. So students enter into getting degrees with quite a good mindset of, like, not a great mindset, but a mindset that understands the market and says, I'm doing this degree because I think it can get me this job. So students aren't stupid, and nobody's doing a degree that they don't think is going to have value. The other thing that's a problem with the Tories' way they look at this is they say, do you have a good job, which is a flexible definition, within 15 months? Now, of course, that screws over people who do social care, for instance, because, like, you don't get paid well in social care, right? But we need more people to do social care. So what's the problem with people being paid badly in social care? It's not that the universities are doing bad degrees. It's that the government won't pay people in social care enough. But because the media accepts the premise, we end up with the thing going, oh, Mickey Mouse degrees. And it's the same thing when you talk about media studies. You go, actually, media studies would be very useful because then fewer people would have to watch podcasts like yours because they'd be like, oh, I actually understand that this is complete rubbish. But most people don't because they don't understand how the media works because they're not taught how the media works. And it's not their fault. Because often when I say that, people think I'm saying they're stupid. I'm not saying that. It's just you only have a certain amount of time to focus on certain things. And all I do is analyze the media, and I've been in it, and I understand how it works. But the average person is just going, oh, they said this on the 6 o'clock news, I presume that's correct.
Yeah. And I guess that's the thing. So I studied international relations and politics at university at De Montfort. And one of the things you're taught is how to think critically, how to look at, how to interpret the world. You're given different theories to look through as a lens.
Yeah.
And if you're doing that and you're looking at the world through certain lenses and you're going, hang on, that's not right, this is wrong, we should change that. Well, how can we change that? Well, we change our government, we change our voting system, we change the way that we think and feel. And if that goes against the status quo, then obviously there is going to be that pushback.
Yeah, and most people try and do... The other thing I think that I've realised around media and media framing of things and government framing of things is most normal people, whatever to a given value of normal, try to do a good job, right? If they can do a job And that's the thing I really hate about the whole Keir Starmer thing with like hardworking people. Some people can't work and they're still valid, right? But if they can do a job, they try and do their best generally. Most people try and do their best because most people want to feel that they have value. So when they read stuff in the media, a lot of people assume, well, they must be trying to tell the truth. And that's not the case. And so this story is a great example of that because Rishi Sunak did PPE. If you want to talk about low-value degrees, PPE is a politics, philosophy and economics, an Oxford course. Most prime ministers in the 20th century did PPE. Like the majority did PPE. If you want to look at how people come out and they do a low-value degree, Liz Truss did PPE, and that's why she's the way she is, you know.
David Cameron did PPE.
Yeah. And the number of prime ministers who did go to university, well, in the post-war era, it's pretty much two people, and the most recent one is John Major, who couldn't afford to go to university, so was a civil servant. And you got to factor in there, he went in and he was in the civil service, but to be fair, he was in like HMRC and stuff. He was like a pretty minor civil servant, but it does give you a different mindset. Whereas you look at someone like, you know, like Tony Blair or Boris Johnson, who did classics. These people do degrees that actually, if you wanted to say what would be a good degree to do if you wanted to be prime minister, these are not good degrees. No. PPE is a great degree for teaching you to bullshit. It's genius, right? Because it teaches you, you're moving around these topics all the time and you learn to sound convincing about something that you don't know anything about.
I think that's what I've definitely realised with like someone like Boris Johnson, for example, the way that he's a great communicator because people listen to him. I think it's because of the gaffes and because of the way that he's conducted himself over the last sort of 20, 30 years. And he gets away with it. And I think that's the key thing. He's always gotten away with it. So to have this by-election that's currently going on now, which is a result of his persistent lying, and again, this arrogance that he could get away with it.
He will be back as well.
In what capacity though?
He'll be an MP again after the next election. There'll probably be another by-election. He'll get in again. The thing that I find very frustrating, and I'm sure there'll be people who will watch this or listen to this and get annoyed, but the FBPE people, follow back pro-European, who
I used to be a member.
The hardcore Remainers. The problem with them is they think that politics is about fairness, right? Even though they're not very fair. If they just don't like someone, they'll find a reason to not like them. But the problem with them is politics is not about the rules. Politics is about understanding how to play and defeat the rules. And Boris Johnson, in one way, is a genius at that because, like, people go, "Oh yeah, but the rules," and he just goes, I don't give a fuck about the rules. I don't care about the rules. In the same way that Dominic Cummings is one of the few campaigners in British history who's never lost an election that he was involved in, be it a referendum or a general election, because he just sees that it's not about telling the truth, it's about saying a compelling message. I wish it weren't like that, but I live in the world that we actually live in, rather than the world I wish we lived in. And a lot of liberals kind of just scream, but my rules, and you're like, yeah, you don't win like that. And what Starmer is doing right now is trying to make the Daily Mail like him by doing things that the Daily Mail likes. But when it comes to the general election, the Daily Mail will still go, he is a communist.
Doesn't know what regardless. A woman is. Define a woman, Keir. Define a woman. That's basically the next election. And
they'll go, he loves Just Stop Oil, even though I know a lot of people in JSO. JSO hates Starmer and Starmer hates JSO. But the papers will still go. And
I don't think they can make that any clearer. Like Starmer could not be like, I don't like these guys. You know, the clip where he's like, get up, I'm opposed to what you're doing, go home, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
and then they're like, yeah, but he still likes them. What was it Grant Shapps said the other day?
Oh, said you're like the political wing of JSO.
I do not think that Grant Shapps wants to play who funds who, especially being a member of the Conservative Party.
It's true, but here's the thing. It will work because what you do with stories like that is you just say stuff enough. It's like saying that Ed Miliband's father, Ralph Miliband, hated Britain, right? The Daily Mail said that, and people who were engaged with the story were like, "Well, this is not true. He fought in the army. He was an academic who really, was very engaged in what Britain should be." But many people, I guarantee, if you went out now and said, to like 100 people, what do you know about Ed Miliband's father? They'd be like, oh, he's a communist, right? Like, people have this error of thinking that everyone is engaged, but most people aren't. I was sent by a pro-European paper to Rotherham to do a story about. They said, go and find out why they voted for Brexit. And before I went, I knew what it would be. And I spent my time in the pubs of Rotherham, like talking to the day drinkers, talking to the after work drinkers, talking to the late night drinkers. And I came back and I said, you're not going to want to print this story. And they said, why? And I said, because I understand why they voted, which is basically they never got anything from London. And so they thought, might as well vote leave, because who cares? It's nothing for... Because I said to them, well, what about if your kids want to go on holiday to Europe? And they're like, we can't afford to go on holiday anywhere, let alone Europe. And this is the problem. You have this whole kind of liberal class. There are a lot of these influencers who say, we just need a Labour government. And you go, yeah, no, it's more complicated than that, lads. If you just want to be red versus blue, you don't know what's happening.
Very much the people who think that the height of political discourse is going fuck shit, cunt bollocks.
Yeah, 100%.
And I guess, to be honest, I think I was part of that group, that cohort at some point when I was first starting producing content. And I think the only things that really changed it for me was kind of seeing how those sort of people were being perceived. And I thought, I don't want to be seen that way, because that's not who I am. And also, I put out a survey at the start of the year to ask for feedback. And one of the things someone said to me was, I love your content, but can you stop swearing so much? Yeah. Because they said that their partner was very abusive to them, was using that sort of language.
Yeah.
And I thought, for me, I don't want people to watch my content and feel uncomfortable because of something like that.
Yeah.
And so I thought, you know what, I'll change it. And look, I do swear now and again, and I do apologize for it, because sometimes there's only so many ways that you can articulate yourself.
I swear a lot because both my parents were in the Royal Navy, so But it's more the compound swearing, like the whole cock-womble thing and stuff, and the whole. Also, often you see these people like. A great example for me is Nadine Dorries, right? There's lots of reasons to hate Nadine Dorries, but often you see people who describe themselves as the left writing really misogynist screeds. My problem with Nadine Dorries is not that she's blonde, not that she's a woman, not that she has kids that she employs, even though that's dodgy. It's just how the system works. My problem with her is that her politics are disgusting. And I think you can argue on that. It's the same thing with like saying Boris Johnson's fat, right?
Yeah.
The minute you do that, I sort of think, well, Boris Johnson's a congenital liar who has used public money to to hide affairs, right? That's a problem. But his weight.
Yeah.
The minute you do that, I just look at that and I think, well, actually, your politics are not socially liberal in the way you think they are. Because if you don't like someone, you'll immediately go, oh, they're fat, or they're stupid, or they're like...
With Nadine Dorries, it's always like the fact that she might be an alcoholic or something like that.
All these people who imply that she wants to shag Johnson. It's like, she may or may not want to, but that if you want to take the moral high ground, and honestly, if you walk up to the moral high ground, it's pretty empty these days. And I certainly don't think I live there. But you see that stuff and you think, you're as bad as them. You're as bad as them.
Reminds me of this this TikTok that I watched, where it's like me listening to my male friend say the most violently misogynistic thing ever, but it's okay because he said it about white women.
Yeah.
I was there like, that's sort of describing me sometimes, and I thought, shit, I don't want to be like that.
Yeah, no, it's really grim. It's like Nadine Dorries has written a load of romance novels that have sold a lot of copies, right? And the argument that people have is like, I think these books are rubbish. Now, I've read a couple of them. They're pretty bad, right? But it's a little bit like there was this thing like 500. There was this Elvis compilation, like 500,000 Elvis fans can't be wrong. To a certain extent, it's like when you talk to people about who reads The Sun. The Sun, a lot of times, is read by men who enjoy reading the football coverage, which is decent, and they don't really get the politics, right? But a lot of left-wing people, like on these podcasts, like the Romaniacs now, oh God, what now? Right? They genuinely, if you listen to it for any amount of time, they despise the working class. They despise people. They're like, the way they talk about Sun readers, and I'm like, the only way that you convert someone away from being a Sun reader is you sit in a pub and you talk to them, and you don't go, you're stupid. You go, have you ever thought about it this way? That's the only way you can do it.
There's a book by James Fulton, which is called Sunburn, that looks at the Sun and looks at the stories that they've covered and the despicable way that they've covered. And I've read that a couple of times now, and I think that is probably the best way to kind of leech people off the Sun. And it basically looks how they came to be.
Yeah.
It was a combination of basically, sensationalist stories and tits.
Yeah.
And the two together works perfectly.
Also, the Sun, like the Daily Mail, can be funny. And the problem with, say, The Guardian, right, was two things. One, The Guardian is actually pretty reactionary in its own way and can be very judgmental. But also, it's very dry. It's not funny. Like, I always talk, when I go and do talks, and I say, like, I've never written for the Daily Mail and I never would. But the thing about the Daily Mail, and people really hate when you say this, it's a highly effective editorial product. It's very well made. You never find a spelling mistake in the Daily Mail. It's sort of it's like it's in the same way that the AK-47 is a beautifully made semi-automatic rifle, right?
I don't know too much about guns.
Well, I know quite a bit about it because I've written about it. But like, because Kalashnikov invented the AK-47 to be made with like cheap metal, and you can make tons of them. And the genius of the AK-47 versus like the British Army's SA-80, right, is they spent millions of pounds on the SA-80, and it was a rifle that you couldn't use where there was sand. Like, and this is a modern rifle, right? And the AK-47 was invented in the Second World War. They still make it now. You can make it for like £4. It's like pressed metal, and it works anywhere. But that's what the Daily Mail is. The Daily Mail is a violent, brutal, horrible product, but it's built very well for what it does. But also, it does have a sense of humor. I always bring up the story they did, which was the house that looked like Hitler. And it was a house that looked like Hitler. And when you saw the picture, you were like, hey, that house really looks like Hitler. And that is a genius of a tabloid newspaper because it puts all this crazy political stuff in there. But mostly it's stories, like you said, tits, but also like, here's a funny thing that happened. Here's a cat that looks weird. And so if you are a person, like I worked on a couple of building sites when I was younger, and a lot of those guys would read that paper because it was funny. They didn't really go for the politics. They were pretty, in their own way, quite progressive. Like, they had gay friends. They didn't really, some of them voted Labour, but they were like, this is a funny paper.
Yeah.
Like, it's fun and the crossword's easy and the sport is good. And so you have to think about these things that way, rather than being, like some of these liberal podcasts can be, of going, oh, these people are stupid. That's the implication.
I guess that's probably the easiest way of, it's kind of dehumanizing people in a way. Basically, like, if you just whittle them down to just being seen as stupid, and then it makes it so much easier to then be like, because converting people is obviously going to be a lot more harder than actually recruiting people.
It's true, but if you look at a lot of the way that I think post-Brexit, there's been a kind of class of grifter that said, we should be back in Europe. Europe's amazing. And it's like, well, European Union is quite corrupt in lots of ways. I voted Remain because generally I felt we're better in because we can make changes. But I didn't think, oh, this is amazing and everything's brilliant, because it's just not the case. Yeah. But these people, they kind of hate leavers. And I have leavers in my family, and they didn't vote, like, thank God they didn't vote for racist reasons. They vote for, like, I think we could do this. And I was saying, oh, honestly, I think that's wrong. Yeah. But you listen to people and they talk about people who voted Leave as if they're like some alien race, and that's not helpful.
I guess that was kind of, so when Brexit happened, I would have been 16, and I was sort of not heavily involved, but I went to like the pro EU marches and stuff when I was like 17, 18, up to like about 19, 18. And you would speak to people there, and it was all like bollocks to Brexit, and it was very much like this idea of like wanting to be punk. Yeah. And this idea of like a sort of counterculture, and it's like, no, this is very much like the establishment. Yeah, granted, like the Leave campaign's been going on since 1992.
But that's what like Leave benefited from. Yeah. Leave was the more punk option. It was like, screw this, whatever. And also, Remain did this mad thing where they were like, oh, well, economically this will be bad for you. It was very dry, right? They should have... well, I'm a Marxist, and I think that you have to think about material conditions. If the Remain campaign had said, this will cost you this much money every month, rather than some highfalutin economic thing about how much it will cost GDP, they should have said, you will lose £300 a month. Yeah. And I will show you how you will lose that, or whatever. Just have a figure. That's the way to do it. Whereas Leave said, you'll get this money. Yeah. And of course, it's a lie, but listen, not everyone's super politically engaged, and we've got to get out of this mindset of being like, oh, everyone has to read every policy paper. Yeah. Like my cousin is an electrician. He makes good money being an electrician. He really doesn't care about politics. There's no way I can make him care about politics. And he is just not going to, so the only way to make him care is to say, oh, this will cost you money. Like, material conditions matter.
Well,
That's
this was
politics.
the thing. Like, I remember once reading like a Fabian policy paper once, and I got to like the first page, and I thought, I'm going to play Football Manager now. Like, I don't. They got to the point where it's like, this doesn't engage me, and I feel like that's what I've learned. It's like we were discussing before we came on, this idea about theory and like trying to hammer it home.
Yeah.
Most people don't give a monkeys about theory.
No.
That's why in my videos, it was when the Owen Paterson scandal was going on, and I was talking through the different types of corruption and what was going on. The video didn't do very well, and I realised people don't care about the definitions. They just want to know what is happening in this case. What is its implications? What is the solution?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what I've taken on. I kind of want to link what you were saying, linking sort of like the whole Remain Leave thing. Do you think the reason there is perhaps more sympathy and sort of benefit of the doubt being given to someone like Keir Starmer because he kind of represents that sort of, I don't know, FBPE, sort of liberal, very much like centrist dad.
I think so.
Vibe.
And the most frustrating thing with people who are hardcore Starmer supporters is they keep doing this thing where they say, you see, he can't promise anything before he gets elected. He have to say everything is terrible, and then when he gets elected, he'll change. And it's like, okay, well, do you know that we used to do a kind of politics where a politician had to tell you a story about why they would fix things? And now we're at a point where, listen, when Tony Blair, in 1996, I was 12 years old, right? So when Tony Blair was elected in 97, I was 13. So I was aware of that campaign. And the thing about that electoral campaign was two things. One, I mean, the Tories, actually, the economy was back on an upswing, so Labour was going to benefit from that, but people were tired of the Tories, so they were going to get it in. But that first Blair government, and we were talking about this before we started recording, they had a pledge card. There were 6 pledges, and there were things they could achieve. Reduce class sizes, reduce waiting lists, cut the deficit. Like these are things that it's like there's a number, and we will pull that number down. And that was very good retail politics. Right now, I don't see that from Starmer. Like, because Starmer just keeps saying, like with the 2-child policy, he was saying for about 2 years before this is appalling policy, and it is. And the argument you get from the disgusting Starmer supporters is, well, most of the public don't support this. But most of the public didn't support the getting rid of the death penalty. Most of the public didn't support gay marriage. There is a certain point where in a representative democracy, if I elect you as a politician, I'm electing you because I believe you can make some choices for me. And what we've got to now is politicians can only do what the public think, the majority thinks we should do. Now, actually, in a constituency representational democracy, what we're actually saying is you are a class of people we're electing to think about these things a bit harder, and then we will go with what you're saying, right? Because I talk to people sometimes, they know nothing about a topic, and that's fair enough. But you see, where I am with it is if I know nothing about it, I'll go, well, what do you think we should do? Because I haven't got a clue. You cannot just go in a well, you can, that's what they do, but you can't go in a opinion poll and go, do you think that we should hang criminals? Because people will say yes, but actually the reality is there's a lot of reasons why we shouldn't just hang criminals, right? And we should have a political class who are professionals and do professional things and have a sense of going and make an argument. Like I was slight tangent, but I was at a festival at the weekend. I was asked to speak at it, and I spoke. And then after I talked to loads of people who wanted to discuss stuff with me. And then hours later, I was at the bar, and it was about 9 o'clock at night. And a guy came up to me, and he was like, "I didn't agree with you about X, Y, and Z." Obviously, it was trans stuff and other things, right? And I said to him, I don't want to do that now. And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because why do boxers not fight in car parks?" He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, boxers are prize fighters, so they fight for money, and they don't fight amateurs." And he went, "Again, I don't get what you mean." I said, "Because you don't get the analogy means I know why you shouldn't argue."
Yeah, of course.
I said, "Because I am like a prize fighter. Like I now argue for money, and I think politicians should argue harder. They should have a principle, and persuade the public. Like JFK, for instance, right? Like obviously his father was mafia connected, and there's bought loads of votes and stuff. But there was a period. You go back to that period and you look at politicians like him. He's against Richard Nixon in that campaign. JFK is saying, "Here's a positive vision for America," right? Or another example is Eisenhower at the end of his presidential period, goes on TV and he does this speech called the military-industrial complex. And he's been a military man and he's been a politician, and he's willing to say something that people don't necessarily know about or want to hear. And he goes, we have to be really careful that we don't allow our politics to be taken over by the military-industrial complex, because there's a huge problem with the military and corporations deciding how we work politically. Now, unfortunately, no one listened to him, but it was a man standing up and saying something he believed in. We've got to a point now where politicians say, "Oh, I just have to say what the public want." And lots of Labour supporters think that's what should happen. But no, Labour should have a vision and sell that vision, not say, "Oh, nobody wants anything to share. Everyone wants everything to continue to be shit, and we're going to go with it."
It's like the whole "there's no money left" argument, and
yeah,
that's
it's like economically illiterate.
Yeah. But I guess that's the thing. I think people believe it because it's been running for the last 13 years. Oh, we would do this, but there's no money left because of Labour. And now the Labour Party are now going, there's not going to be any money left because of the Tories. And it's like, fucking create it. That's your job. Economic growth.
And we
Let's
have
do
a
it.
media. We have a media that is so addicted to doing this thing of saying it's like a household budget. It's not like a household budget. It's not like a credit card. A sovereign state can create wealth in any number of ways, not just through quantitative easing, which they got obsessed and addicted with through the austerity era. You can do it in loads of ways. For instance, also like with the benefit cap, right? The 2-child cap. You could cut. It's a £1.2 billion policy, right?
1.3, yeah.
1.3, right? Cut that off Trident. Just say we're taking 1.3 billion off Trident. That's a rounding error on Trident. Trident still gets paid for. I mean, it shouldn't, in my opinion, but like there are tons of things we spend money on that we could cut. For a government, 1.3 billion is tiny, and we know that, but they don't want to talk about it like that. But if I talk to just a bloke in the street and say 1.3 billion pounds, he thinks that's loads. So the way you answer that is you talk about it as a percentage of government spending, and then it's a rounding error.
Well, they've said if the 2-child cap on benefits was scrapped, 250,000 children would be immediately lifted out of poverty, and another 850,000 would be alleviated. That strain would be alleviated. Families in one in 4 of the poorest constituencies in the country would be £3,000 better off. It's a policy that is so regressive and basically demonizes children for the crime of being born, something no child ever asks for.
Well, I saw Rachel Reeves on BBC Breakfast the other day, and she said they were asked her about universal free school meals. I was a governor in Tower Hamlets where they have universal school meals for primary school. It's brilliant because for a ton of reasons. One is there's no stigma for kids on free school meals because everyone is. 2 is if the parents if richer parents are engaged in what school meals are like, the quality of school meals goes up because richer parents are like, I want my kid to eat good food. This needs to be better. There's a whole, everyone is involved then. It would make sense to have universal school meals at secondary and primary because it will actually bring money in. It will actually make, it saves money in tons of ways, right? Because you have to deal with child hunger and poverty, and if you have free school meals, suddenly you'll the money you spend is paid. It's the same way that during lockdown they took all the homeless people off the streets, and they could do that, but they won't do it now because basically homelessness serves a political role because it's to say to you better behave yourself because you could be homeless. But if we take homeless people off the streets, it costs less money. I think we take homeless people off the streets because it's morally abhorrent to have people be homeless. But if you want to be a hard-ass economically about it, homelessness is very expensive in terms of crime. It's very expensive in terms of social care intervention stuff. If you take homeless people off the streets, they don't get unwell. It doesn't cost the NHS as much. It's actually cheaper you could just put them all in hotels and it would be less money than having homeless people. But they don't want to do that because the papers will say, oh, you've given them free things. And so we've got to a point where the Blairite era got us obsessed with means testing. Make sure nobody gets any money they don't deserve. When actually, means testing costs a load of money as well. The other reason to have free school meals is give it to everyone. Then you don't have to build a system to manage who is allowed. The system to manage who's allowed it costs more money often than just giving everyone it.
Yeah, well, I suppose bringing up on a point when you mentioned about the papers talking about homeless people. I suppose the only time they'd ever speak in favour of homeless people is if it's refugees in those hotels.
They say we could put homeless people in there.
It's like
not brown people
you don't give a shit about.
Exactly. It's always a hierarchy of who do they hate the most.
So there's three by-elections today. One in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, one in Selby and Anstey, and another in Somerton and Frome.
Yeah.
How do you think they're going to go?
It's a mugs game, and likelihood is people watch or hear this after they happen. Uxbridge, because of the ULEZ, the charge in London could well stay Tory. It's a pretty Tory place. The majority will drop there. The other two will probably go either both Labour or one just about Lib Dem and one Labour. But I think Labour will probably win 2 out of 3. Now, they'll make that a huge deal. And it's good. It's good if you're opposition and you win by-elections. But, incumbent governments usually lose by-elections. So that's not amazing. The key will be how much do they win by? If you think if they're going to win the general, then they want to dominate. They really want to. If the 2 they win, they need to dominate. Like, it needs to be a really major swing and a large majority.
Thing is, I feel like with by-elections, there's only so much you can read into, because again, I think with this one, it's, as you said, incumbent governments never tend to win.
Yeah.
Also, turnout tends to be a lot lower, and you really can't. I wouldn't say you can read too much into it. And I feel like a Labour victory will just it's just apathy against the Tories. They don't like the Tories anymore.
But if they didn't win them, or they won them with a very slim majority, it does say something.
Yeah.
You of course, you've got to factor in the turnout and say, well, it's always low turnout. But Labour need to do, if you want to go back to the last time they won with a huge majority, in the by-elections that Blair fought prior to 97, they dominated mostly. There were a couple they didn't, but mostly they did. And the other thing you always have to factor with by-elections is expectation management. So the Tories have been out there saying, well, we'll probably lose all 3, thinking, maybe we'll win 1. Because if they win 1, that's amazing, right? Whereas with Labour, it's very difficult because the expectation is they are going to dominate. And if they don't win all 3, or they don't win the 2 that they should win by a large margin, then you're going to get the press going, ooh, Starmer, well, you should do better than that. So that's the trouble. But you're right, by-elections are their own thing, and often people forget that they are that local issues dominate in by-elections. It's why the Uxbridge one could still go Tory. Also, because they're very Tory in Uxbridge and Ruislip. They just are.
Nick, thank you so much for coming on. Before you go, is there anything that you'd like to promote?
Just follow me on Twitter at Broken Bowl, where you can find most stuff there. And thanks a lot.
And to all of you who are listening, thank you so much. We appreciate all of the kind comments that you're putting in, even the nasty ones as well. Thank you for boosting me. Really boosting my ego. Thank you so much for engaging. And we'll see you all for the next one. Thank you.